TCI is brought to you by Unbridled Songs Standing at TaylorMade Stallions, sire of 100 stakes winners including Belmont contender Will Take Charge.
Welcome back to TCI, your inside track to the Triple Crown. Alongside Joel Cunningham, I'm Jon Siegel. Well, Joel, we've made it to the Belmont Stakes, the final leg of the Triple Crown. We have no chance of a Triple Crown winner again this year, but Joel, we do have an exciting Belmont to talk about. When I look at the race, I see 9 horses that are returning from the Kentucky Derby. I can't remember the last time that I've seen this many Derby horses back in the Belmont.
Yeah, it's almost half the Derby field, so that's a pretty good amount coming back now, and it makes a little sense from the standpoint that you had a different winner of the Derby, than you did the Preakness, obviously. Now coming back, those horses that did not run in the Preakness specifically, they've had a month off. So they feel like they're fresh, maybe ready to take on that mile-and-a-half challenge, which is a total crapshoot of a distance. And I really think when you start looking at the long shot results of this race over the past few years, you know, it sort of gives a, you know, if you had a good enough horse to run the Derby, it gives a connections thoughts that, hey, let's give the Belmont a shot. We might still have a chance at an odd distance to still win one of these things.
Well, not as big a factor, the draw, as it is in the Kentucky Derby. I mean,
right.
Belmont Park, the track is so big, it's a smaller field, but everybody drew relatively well. You think the bigger storyline may be the weather?
I think it is going to be the weather. I mean, I think it's going to be very similar to the Derby. And you mentioned 9 horses coming out of the Derby. Who ran well that day and who didn't run well? I think maybe you could start putting lines through some horses just based on the fact that if it comes up wet, just look at that Derby form with 9 horses coming back in the Belmont Stakes. And I think you have to pay attention to a local horse just based on the fact that he loves the track and he loves a sloppy track based on his performance in the Peter Pan, and that's Freedom Child, John. You have to probably give him a little more credit on a sloppy track. But we all know Orb likes it. We think Revolutionary likes it. Golden Soul obviously ran well over it. So I think there's several in here that are going to appreciate a sloppy track.
Well, let's talk about the horses here individually for a little bit. And let's start off with the Kentucky Derby winner, Orb. You mentioned that he liked the slop there at Churchill Downs. It'll be interesting to see how he handles it. I want to know, what do you think about the draw and what do you think about his chances in the Belmont?
Well, he drew in the middle. He drew the 5-hole, which I think is great for him. You know, everybody remembers in the Preakness, he drew down the inside, and I'm not so sure that having the 1 hole in terms of needing room mattered much for him. It's just the fact that he was stuck down on the inside over a track that was very loose on the inside. I mean, he was off the bridle down the backside. You saw Joel Rosario riding him. So he clearly, call it a bounce, call him not handling the track, whatever. He didn't even have an opportunity to finish in there. I mean, it's not like they asked him for run on the turn. He didn't have it. He didn't have a run down the back stretch. He just simply was not handling the surface. Coming back now on his home track at Belmont, where he's breezed so beautifully. I loved his breeze this past weekend, John. I think coming out of his own stall with 3 weeks of rest, you're going to see the Orb back. Now, the question for him will be, and I think he'll get a good enough pace, and he's so tractable anyway. He's not like a dead closer. Right. I think, you know, Rosario will be able to put him into the race whenever he feels necessary. The question for him, again, is the distance. 1.5 miles. When you look at that Malibu Moon, when you start looking at his dosage number, you know, and the fact that, you know, he's got one of the biggest dosage numbers in the field. It's 3.21. You know, there hasn't been a horse in 10 years that had one higher than a 3 come back and win the Belmont Stakes. He'll also be the favorite. Hasn't been a favorite win the Belmont Stakes since 2005. So we know this is a very tough race, and it's that 1.5 mile distance that Orb's going to have to prove he can negotiate.
Well, you talked about pace just a second ago. It's going to be very interesting. Freedom Child, a horse that won by over 12 lengths in the Peter Pan. He drew the 2, but he has a horse in Oxbow out in the 7 path. You're thinking that there may be some race riding right off the beginning of the race.
Well, if you listen to Tom Albertrani, Freedom Child is a free-running horse. They're not going to raid him. He does his best work on the front end, they feel, and even though he's lightly raced at this point, they're not going to take him off of his tactics that earned him that impressive Peter Pan win last time out. And the fact that he drew down the inside in the 2-hole, you're going to see Freedom Child go. And there's a long run to that first turn, but I expect him to make the lead going into the turn. I think Oxbow, obviously, with Gary Stevens breaking out from the 7 post, is going to kind of track him, maybe sit right off his flank, and they're going to be your pace setters. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of rhythm do they get in. Do they really face off and it starts to be a contentious type pace that really sets it up for a closer in here? Or are they going to, you know, sort of really slow it down on the front end? Because, again, at 1.5 miles, it's not a race we run every day. So trying to figure out the clock for the pace scenario is going to be very interesting with these jockeys. And I think you'll see some horses like Palace Malice there stalking in the second flight, as well as maybe Unlimited Budget.
Well, you're going to see two horses, your second and third place finisher in the Kentucky Derby. They're obviously going to make a late run in here, Joel. You know, we think that they both like the muddy surface. You know, with Revolutionary, there was some people saying, you know, he kind of got stuck in behind. Maybe Calvin moved just a little bit too late. What do you think about his chances in the Belmont?
You know, last time we had a sloppy track, it was playing very favorably to the inside. I mean, if you can remember, you know, Stay Thirsty was along the inside, then obviously Ruler on Ice, you know, a horse that you wouldn't think would be bred to handle the Belmont distance, had a pretty good dosage. He won the race. Stay Thirsty was second, but it was an odd result. You basically had two long shots there. 1-2, and there was a clear speed bias on the inside on that sloppy track. So it'd be interesting to see. You need to really pay attention to how that track's playing if it comes up sloppy, because immediately, even though I like Golden Soul and I like Revolutionary, I personally don't care for a dead closer going a mile and a half in this type of race. It's just, I want a horse with a little more tractability like Orb, if you're going to come from off of it, to be able to put yourself into the race when you need to, instead of making that one run. But with that said, if the fact that they like they both came up the rail in the Derby, they both like a wet track. If the speed is if it's favoring towards the inside on a sloppy track, I think that gives them a chance, especially if they make their runs up the inside.
All right, now we see Todd Pletcher. He's got a lot of horses in here, including a filly. You know, he's brought a filly to the Belmont before. He was successful doing it.
He was, and that was Rags to Riches, John, a filly that was obviously bred to handle, you know, the Belmont Stakes mile and a half distance, and the fact that Giselle won it the year before, a half-brother there. So this time I'm not as enthusiastic about Unlimited Budget. Yes, she may look like a colt, but she has that Ocala stud 2-year-old female family, and I know she's by Street Sense, but I just do not see her being one that handles a mile and a half distance. So it's a big step up for her. To me, she is a toss in here for me.
All right, so tell me, who do you like in this year's Belmont Stakes?
You know, it's interesting. I'm going to go with the long shot, just from the standpoint that, you know, we haven't seen the favorites run particularly well in this race. So at a mile and a half, I'll take Palace Malice. You know, I'm still concerned about him getting a mile and a half distance, being by Curlin, who Rags to Riches beat. I'm not so sure Curlin even liked a mile and a half, but has enough stamina on the bottom side. The dosage numbers check out pretty well relative to the field. He has a 2.64, which is around 2.5 or lower is what I'd like to see. And his Tomlinson number's pretty good too. It's over 300. There's only a handful that are over 300 in here. So when you're trying to find a colt that's doing well, is well rested after the Derby, blinkers off, good rider Mike Smith. I think he's going to get the trip stalking behind that first flight of speed, so he's going to get first run there. If Palace Malice can negotiate the distance, I think he could be the horse that upsets the apple cart in here. He's 15-1 morning line.
All right, that would give us a different winner in all three legs this year in the Triple Crown.
Well, and this is a horse that we've liked all along. You know, start looking at some of our initial top 5, top 10 lists. Palace Malice, Oxbow, and Orb are all horses that, you know, we sort of identified early and we've liked. So it'd be interesting to see if that were the mix there. Orb's the horse to beat, obviously, but it's just hard to trust him at a mile and a half, but he is the best horse. So I think Orb is a very deserving favorite.
All right, just so it's on record, I'm going for Revolutionary. I think you got Javier Castellano back on him. I think he's going to run huge in here. Dead closer. I give it to him in the slot.
Well, hey, if that track gets sloppy, we know he likes that. And I know Calvin's not on him to come up the rail, but that track can get typey, and you just never know what's going to happen at that point. So I can't knock you for that.
All right, thank you, Joel, and thank you guys for watching. Make sure you come back next week. We'll recap the Belmont Stakes.